Top Muffin Top Sunday chat. I wasn't going to bail on you guys because, quite frankly, I have some friends that want to play video games and I want to go do that. We're going to do an audiobook chat and I'm going to see if I can do both. But you guys are a priority. I had some friends that they're like, hey, man, the one just bought a brand new PC and another one wants to play a game. And quite frankly, I haven't been able to play games because I've been hunting and doing other crap. So I'm playing fucking games with my friends tonight, but we're also going to do a chat because it's not right to leave you guys hanging on my normally scheduled stuff either. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to knock the audiobook out because with everything happening in Syria, I think the global demand on terror is probably going to increase, if that makes sense. If you guys read between those lines, I think we will be seeing more movements like that. People are going to be empowered, things like that. I think having governments absolutely crippled and toppled by terrorist regimes is disgusting. And a lot of big chess pieces got moved on the board this year. I mean, France just crumbled. You're not hearing a lot about that in the news. Canada just did some big moves. You know, they may be on the ropes for being toppled. They're pretty close. Africa has been a disaster. Pretty much the Middle East has been a giant powder keg of bullshit all year. And I think Turkey's backing these people that basically just took over Syria, which is remnants of, ISIS and who's the people that took the World Trade Center, supposedly? Al-Qaeda. The remnants of ISIS and Al-Qaeda is basically who Turkey's supporting with military hardware from the U.S. So them just toppling a government in Syria, which is a big powder keg and owns a lot of oil and things like that, which we trade with, is a problem. So this audiobook, probably realistic possibility of 75 to 80% popping off stateside is what my outlook is. So I want to get through it. I want to get it in people's heads. I want you to get thinking about what you're carrying, what your options are, what you want to put up for stash management, caches, even just adding some stuff at a person's house if it's on your way, whatever, adding a gallon of water to your car if you're going to have to walk home in an event like this, things like that. Stupid, simple shit. But yeah, let's do it.
Plan. Contingency plans, ideas of how to plan alternate routes,
which can be used in a lot of things, natural disaster, things like that. I want you guys to think.
Government ordained soft target locations like schools and churches and government buildings,
Yeah.
Kind of be aware of the entrances and exits and make your loved ones aware of that, even if they're not like hip to it all.
Hell yeah. What's up, Hutch? What's up, Fiend Dog? First one in the chat. Old man Butt Wrinkles. So yeah, guys, I'm gonna do a chat, but we're gonna do this. I think that's the best way. I want to get through this book, and I've been listening to 1 Second After a lot lately. I'm listening it like the 8th time in 2 months, so probably gonna rock that one again. I listened to it all the other day, hunting and everything like that. So I don't know. I got a lot on my mind. I'm updating kit. I'm putting stash locations everywhere. I'm got other people doing the same and our plans and things like that. And hopefully this, helps you guys think and all that. So without further ado, whatever. Gayness.
I do.
Yes. Is this can you see this lawfully?
Nah.
Okay.
Just a standard Rumble logo.
Here we go. We're doing it old school, kicking it. Here we go. This is the audiobook, The Day of Wrath. We are an hour and 28 minutes in. If you guys want to go back and listen to it again or check out the timestamp, I think I put 23 in the chat, but that's okay. This is a great book. This is in my audiobook section in Discord for free. And this will piss you off. What's coming up especially. So be ready. Backstory, this is a teacher. He's not supposed to carry. He carries a Ruger LCP 380. He's got 6 shots, and this school is being attacked by 4 armed people of Muslim descent, and they just started shooting up the school. So This is not. This is Fantasyland Minecraft. This is discussing a book. This is not, telling anybody to go do things. So, without further ado, here we go.
Reply, Bob picked him up and unceremoniously dumped him out the window. Then the gunfire hit the door of the classroom, the rounds easily piercing it. More screaming. A child in the middle of the room was cut down. He stepped up against the wall alongside the doorway, drawing his weapon back out, trying to remember if he had chambered a round in the semi-auto he was holding. He pulled the slider back, and an unfired bullet popped out. Damn it! He had chambered a round, but in the confusion forgotten he had done so. A damn amateur move. The bullet, one of only 6 rounds in his possession, rolled across the floor. Damn it, pick it up later. You've only got 5 left. He waited for the door to swing open. Near Portland, Maine. My God. Oh, my God. Kathy Peterson stood transfixed, watching the local news feed. We repeat, there are reports of a shooting incident unfolding at Chamberlain Middle School. Our ICAM helicopter is racing to the scene and should be there any moment. The video feed from the helicopter was on, focused forward as the pilot swung northeastward, flying parallel to I-95. The highway was filled with police cars responding to the terrified calls coming in from the school. We also now have a confirmed report of a fatal shooting at a hotel by the Falmouth exit that may be related. This appears to be a frightful tragedy unfolding just outside of Portland, Maine. The reporter paused, touching her earpiece, nodding. As soon as we have a helicopter over Chamberlain Middle School, we will come back on, but now we have this urgent news release from our main studio in New York. The image shifted, but Kathy was no longer watching it. She was running into Shelley's room to rouse her from her nap. A tragedy of national proportions appears to be unfolding across America at this moment, the report echoed from the kitchen television. We now have confirmed reports of 3 schools, one near Austin, a second in Bakersfield, California, and a third near Portland, Maine, that appear to be under attack. In a minute or so, we should have a live helicopter feed from the school in Maine. She had Shelley out of her crib, the toddler fussing to be woken up so rudely, and feeling her mother's panic, started to cry. Kathy wasn't sure what to do, but to stay here was not the answer. She returned to the kitchen. Holding Shelley, she used her free hand to call Bob. His laughing voice came on. Hey, busy at the moment, but leave a message and someday I'll get back to you. Bob, find Wendy and get the hell out of there now, she screamed. She hung up, attention focused back to the television report. Just a moment, just a moment. We are getting a 4th report now from our affiliate in Charlotte, North Carolina, of an elementary school in Hickory, North Carolina. Numerous gunshots, a police officer dead in front of the school. The reporter in the New York studio turned her gaze from the camera. The steady professional composure of a national-level news anchor shattered as she turned to look off camera. Everyone in this studio, shut the hell up, she yelled. I want accurate reports only. I only want accurate reports coming out of here. Now do your jobs! The reporter looked back to the camera, obviously shaken. My apologies. We are trying to sort this out as it comes in and to avoid panic. A second reporter came on camera, a popular anchor of the station's mid-afternoon news program, sitting down beside her and trying to appear calm. She gratefully acknowledged his presence. He was well known for having been a reporter who had gone in with the troops in the 2003 campaign into Iraq and had repeatedly been under fire. He deferentially held up a sheet of paper, offering to hand it to her, but she nodded for him to read the report. I've just been handed a copy of a report from our affiliate station in Billings, Montana, and I quote, "A siege is unfolding at an elementary school in the northwest section of that city. There appears to be a coordinated attack now underway against at least 5 of our nation's elementary and middle schools. It is obviously a terrorist attack on our nation's children. We promise to keep you abreast as the situation unfolds. We now have a feed from our affiliate in Portland with a news helicopter over." He looked down at a note someone had handed to him. Chamberlain Middle School. The few seconds that she took to watch triggered a sob of pure horror in Kathy. It was an aerial shot of the playground where Wendy took recess every day when the weather was good, a place of swings, of slides, and of monkey bars, where in winter snowball fights were forbidden but broke out anyway. Oh, God, Wendy, my baby, Kathy gasped. The playground now looked like a war zone, which in fact it was. The camera swung across half a dozen small bodies sprawled in the yard, revealing red splotches, pools of blood, children crawling, a teacher crouching low and carrying a child. And then, live, for all the nation to see, the teacher went limp, a puff. A mist of blood and clothing burst out of him, both he and the child going down. The camera began to zoom in, but then pulled back, as if it were too horrific to be seen. The reaction was almost as instinctive to not gaze too closely upon the horror, in the same way that cameras were finally turned away on 9/11 when, by the hundreds, bodies plunged down the faces of the North and South Towers of the World Trade Center. But this time it was children who were dying. Kathy's phone rang. "Bob!" She almost dropped Shelley, who was kicking and squirming while sliding the screen of the phone on. No, it was not Bob's ringtone. It was her friend Mary Browning in Austin. "My God, Kathy, are you guys okay?" I don't know. I just saw on the news it was your school. What is going on?" "I don't know. I just saw it too." "They're hitting a school in Austin. Not my son's, but I'm going to get him now," she cried. "They're hitting every school in the country. Mary, I can't talk. I'm going to get Wendy and Bob." She clicked the phone off and ran out the door. She realized that she still held Shelley in her arms, who was kicking and sobbing. She turned to her neighbor's home. The Andersons? She didn't know them well. They were an older couple, their kids were off to college, and the mother, Elizabeth, apparently stayed at home. That was about all she knew of them. A car was in the driveway. She ran to the house, rang the doorbell, waited a few seconds, then abandoned social convention and tried the doorknob and burst in. "Kathy? What in God's name?" Elizabeth stood at the top of the stairs, hair disheveled, wearing yoga pants and a t-shirt, and was obviously confused. She most likely was enjoying the luxury of a nap while the world was going insane. "Have you been watching the news?" "No," and there was a slight edge of annoyance to her voice. "I was sleeping." She descended the flight of stairs and was startled as Kathy stepped forward to try and hand off Shelley, who was now worked up to a fever pitch of crying. "Take Shelley, please. I've got to go. I've got to get to the school." She literally shoved Shelley into Elizabeth's arms so fiercely that the older woman actually did clutch the child. "Kathy, what is going on? Calm down." "I can't calm down. Watch, Shelley, please, and turn on the news." She turned and ran out the door, leaving it open, jumping into the SUV. She fumbled with her pockets, then cursed foully. The keys. She ran back into the house, leaving her front door open, and grabbed her purse, opening it. The keys were within, and also the Ruger that was identical to Bob's. She pushed the weapon into her pocket, and as she did so, she heard Shelley screaming nearby. Kathy turned to see Elizabeth entering the doorway, eyes going wide at the sight of Kathy pocketing the small weapon. "Merciful heavens, Kathy, are you going insane?" And Kathy could see the woman was actually afraid, and even protectively clutching Shelley tight against her shoulder. "The world is insane," she cried, pointing at the blaring television. She shouldered her way past Elizabeth and jumped into the car. Seconds later, she was tearing down the driveway and was nearly T-boned by Denise Kilgore, another mother, whose only child was in first grade at McAuliffe Elementary School several blocks away from Chamberlain. All across the neighborhood, dozens of parents were getting into cars, tearing down driveways and office parking lots, and flooring it to McAuliffe Elementary, Perry High School, Chamberlain Middle School, not just in Portland, but also to Oak Grove School in Vassalboro, Maine, to Tecumseh High in Lafayette, Indiana, to Jackson Elementary in Salem, Oregon, to thousands of schools across the country. The panic was on, just as the Caliph had prophesied to his followers. A news report from a school in Toledo, Ohio, came on the abandoned television, which reported a lockdown and shooting with one person dead so far. A possible attack, another similar report, came out of Savannah, Georgia. Both were actually panic-stricken parents, pulling up in front of their child's school and leaping out of their vehicles. Those two unfortunate people were both openly carrying guns and ignoring the shouted warning of panicky police officers who were racing to every school around the country, believing that they were arriving only seconds ahead of, or just behind, a potential attack. Both parents were shot dead in a fusillade of fire. It would take hours to sort out that they were not terrorists, only frightened parents, but their deaths added to the tally of schools reported as being under attack. Inside Joshua Chamberlain Middle School, the door to Bob's classroom burst open, and the terrorist, the barrel of his assault weapon poised low from the hip, stepped halfway into the room with a calm arrogance. He fired a shot to kill a child, the one already wounded in the arm and huddled in the corner of the room. Bob leveled his palm-sized Ruger at him and fired from less than 3 feet away. Shaking, he missed completely. His startled enemy actually stepped back. This was not supposed to be happening. The infidels were cowards, sheep. How could this be? He started to swing the muzzle of his rifle toward the side of the door to fire through the flimsy plaster walls. Bob stepped forward, this time nearly pressing the muzzle of the Ruger into his opponent's face, and squeezed the trigger. The shot caught the man in the jaw, shattering it in a spray of blood and teeth. With a strangled cry, the attacker fell back into the hallway, cursing, and a rapid spray of gunfire invaded the classroom. Every remaining window in the classroom shattered. Children huddled in the corner, out of the way of the barrage. Bob could actually see shell casings ejecting out in the hallway, but the murderer whom he was certain he had hit was not visible. "Come on, you pig, you son of a bitch! Come on in!" Bob taunted. No response, only labored breathing, choking and spitting, then the sound of a magazine dropping. It registered in his mind, but he did not have the instinct to react swiftly. Something told him that if he reacted instantly, he would catch his enemy reloading, reeling from the shock of being hit, and finish him. But he did not have the training to instantly press his attack, and he remained frozen in place for several crucial seconds, pistol raised, as if expecting his enemy to foolishly step into his line of fire yet again. His opponent was still out in the hallway, heavy, raspy breathing, gasping for air, gagging as if choking, and in that crucial moment hesitating as well in disbelief that he had actually been wounded by a damned infidel. He slammed in a loaded magazine and chambered around, the sound of it loud and clear to Bob over the wailing of the fire alarm, the cries of the children, and the hissing of the sprinklers. "Come on, you pig-eater!" Bob screamed, trying to provoke him. There was a grunted response, and a shout from down the hallway, sounding like a command from one of the other killers. Several seconds of silence followed. Bob waited tensely. Surely they had grenades of some kind, and Bob was waiting for one to bounce into the room. He caught a glimpse out the window, hoping to see a reflection of who was in the hallway, but all of the windows had been blown out. He heard shooting outside, the sound of sirens now, and what must be a helicopter. Maybe that was help at last, a SWAT team or something? Wendy. He couldn't see her. Don't lose focus. Your death is on the other side of that open doorway. He actually had a reflective thought, amazed with how many thoughts struck him, that he knew what they meant about one's life flashing before them in their final seconds. That realization was a warning. He fell to the floor, and as he did so, the wall space where he had been standing a second earlier was stitched by half a dozen bullets, plasterboard exploding across the room. He caught Patty's gaze, her surviving children clustered in the corner of the room around her. He motioned for them to stay down on the floor. They were all pinned, their unseen killer obviously injured, recoiling and deciding on his next course of action. Down low on the floor, Bob waited, pistol aimed to shoot upward if the murderer made a dash through the doorway. There was no gunfire for more than half a minute, and then a new eruption of staccato bursts, but not aimed toward the room he was in. He heard the doorway to the faculty lounge being shot open, a few shots from within that small room, a pause, then more shots, this time apparently from the classroom across the hall next to the faculty lounge. The bastard was pushing on with his killing, not coming back for him. Bastard! He had faced someone armed, but now retreated to kill in other rooms. "Come on, you pig-eater, come on!" he screamed, trying to lure him away from his mission. Then there was a sudden change to the sound. A shotgun? Half a dozen explosive shots rang out, children screaming, trapped in the corners of the room across the hall, and dying. "God, what do I do?" he silently prayed. "Hold here. At least I've got this room secure, or try and get the bastard and finish him. If he gets me, these kids die. What do I do?" he begged God as the sound of weapons shifted yet again. They were pistol shots, and someone— he recognized the voice of Olivia Wilson, a mild, bespectacled reading teacher— begged for mercy for her kids. Her cries were suddenly cut off. "God, do I hold here or try and stop him?" The answer finally came from within. Get these kids out, then try and take the killer on again. Get the kids out now, he hissed to Patty, who finally nodded acknowledgement as he pointed to the shattered windows. Cop cars, half a dozen, were racing down the approach road to the school. He could see one of the vehicles being hit by fire, but at least that meant one of the murderers' attention was diverted. Patty, get the kids out now. I can't go after them until you're out of this room. I'll hold the door here while you get them out. Chapter 5. As they had so adroitly planned, so clearly understanding their enemy far better than the enemy understood themselves, the highways were now flooding with traffic. There were over 70 million children attending nearly 100,000 public schools in America. Millions more were in private, church, and parochial schools. The targets had been carefully chosen to hit outside of major cities and in geographical locations so that no part of the country felt safe. All of the targets were very close to interstate highways, the route that so many parents would flock to within minutes to speed to the schools their children were in, whether that school was under attack or not. The fear of school shootings had been a running nightmare in the heart of every parent since Columbine. Endless rounds of arguments and debates swirled around the scenario. It was those lone, sick killers in American schools across the previous 2 decades that had inspired the Caliph with his plan. Nearly all had been psychotic American males from teens to early 20s. All were loners. Nearly all had fantasized online and obsessively spent hundreds of hours with the endless outpouring of America's entertainment media of shooter games and mass murder movies. Nearly all had played out a sick, perverted fantasy in their final moments as they had become killers, usually vengeance for some slight from a girl, from a bully, or from the system. The killings were a power trip during their final moments that all would cower as they stalked the halls. And nearly all had ultimately proven themselves cowards in the Caliph's eyes, either fleeing when the police arrived or killing themselves like Hitler in his bunker. And so the pattern of response in American schools had evolved, a plethora of "this campus is a gun-free zone," drills and more drills, usually just with teachers, of course. No one wanted to frighten the children, even though they saw the news every night and chatted about it on Facebook. Lock the door, lie down, wait for rescue. A few will die, maybe even a few dozen, but the vast majority will be saved by lying down and waiting for others to come to the rescue. The brilliance of the Caliph's plan was understanding the pattern of the infidels' reaction, how they would respond collectively to a threat to their precious children. They usually had just 1 or 2 offspring, not 6 or 8, with a willingness to see their progeny sacrificed to Allah's will. No, for them each child was precious, doted upon and coddled. The parents across the entire nation would react, the nation falling into mass panic. Unlike the fool bin Laden's attack on 9/11, every American would feel personally threatened, not just those living in New York and Washington. Every American in those first moments would fear that their precious child was about to become a target as well. Though only a few out of nearly 100,000 schools were now threatened, millions of parents would rush out of their homes and their offices and flood onto the interstates. The frenzy would build. The planners had calculated it well and had laughed over it. Thus it now unfolded, and the time to launch Sword 2 had come. There was no need to send the final message. All who were trained knew the exact moment, but in his arrogant delight he ordered the message to be sent anyhow. Sword 2. After sending the message, the transmitting phone was left active in the corner of a captured Christian church near Raqqa, the messenger laughing as he drove off. Sword 2 had already begun in some places such as Austin, Syracuse, and near Portland, Maine, ahead of schedule. Attack teams began to pull out of hotel parking lots, which, in less than a minute, put them on the American interstates, highways built as copies of the German autobahns, ironically ordered as a defense measure in the event of a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union. Sword 2 was made up of teams of 2 to 3 jihadist martyrs. There was a driver, armed with a 9mm pistol for a final defense, and 1 or 2 gunmen armed with AK-47s, each with 30 or more clips of jacketed rounds. Simply get on the highway, swing alongside cars, preferably those with a number of passengers, and shoot the driver. Tractor-trailers were sweet targets. Drive up, send several shots through the door, then speed on, hoping the truck jackknifes. Even better if it is carrying petrol or some hazardous material. The team that roared onto Interstate 40 near Knoxville headed east for the connection to Interstate 81 and hit their jackpot in the first 2 minutes. A tractor-trailer hauling petrol swerved out of control, the holy warrior laughing that he had hit the driver in the head with his first shot. All of the mayhem that ensued was created by a single 7.62 round fired from a Kalashnikov. That opening move proved how simple the plan was, how effective it was, and it created joyful anticipation of all that they could accomplish in the next few hours. The truck crashed through the flimsy highway barrier into the westbound lanes, rolling over, gasoline spilling out, bursting into flames, and seconds later exploding. 2 more trucks were taken out by the Knoxville attack team in less than a minute, one on each side of the highway, sealing the road off in both directions. 200 miles further east, on I-40, a Sword 2 unit was now working in cooperation with the Sword 1 unit that had stormed an elementary school several miles to the west of Hickory. From the highway, they could see that the school was burning and traffic was backed up on the exit ramp. The American parents were in complete panic. Apparently, an accident occurred at the top of the ramp blocking the exit. Vehicles were swinging onto the grassy berm to get around the bottleneck, but since it had rained heavily the night before, many were bogging down, wheels spinning. The team of 3 actually broke their train procedure for the moment, so rich was their target now. Coming to a stop, one of the killers shot the driver of the car behind them and triggered a chain reaction accident involving several dozen cars. The jihadists then exited their vehicle and stood along the side of the road, calling on their God, laughing as they turned the traffic jam at the exit ramp into target practice, one ordering the other to take aimed single shots and not waste ammunition on such easy targets. Several dozen frantic parents were slaughtered in little more than a minute. It was almost too easy, they thought, as they got back into their car and pressed on westward. Nearly all of the other teams stuck to their training in those first minutes. On Interstate 287, the outer ring of New York City, 30 cars were taken off the road in the first 5 minutes. At a jammed exit ramp near the school under attack in Bakersfield, California, nearly as many parents were now dead as students in the school. In reality, the casualty rate in the schools was just now beginning to soar as captive children were herded into the gym to drag out the agony of what the response team thought would be negotiations. All negotiations were a sham, of course. A knife could kill quietly, even gruesomely, while those surrounding the building outside heard nothing from the locker rooms where the slaughter was taking place and thought they were talking their opponents into laying down their weapons. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Wheeling, West Virginia, Birmingham, Alabama, Little Rock, Arkansas, Crete, Nebraska, Salt Lake City, Utah, Phoenix, Arizona, and along remote stretches of highways such as south of Valdosta, Georgia, and northward along I-77 into West Virginia, the 30-plus teams of Sword 2 were unleashing death. The roads were packed with parents bent on reaching their children, most not even seeing death racing up behind them or about to pass in the opposite direction. Only one team of Sword 2 had been completely stopped in those first minutes due to a random encounter with a county sheriff in an unmarked car near Kingston, New York. It was one of those one-in-a-million moments, but all plans, even the best-laid ones, are prone to a random factor. The officer had served 4 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan with a military police unit. He, like nearly every police officer in America, was racing to secure a community school in the minutes after Sword 1 was unleashed. As he approached the entry ramp over the interstate, which at this location was part of the New York Turnpike, he saw the attack vehicle with its 2 gunmen who were heading to the turnpike to start their attack. A flash of recognition. What drew his attention were the windows of the vehicle. All of them were down, and the day was chilly. He looked closer. Could the man in the passenger seat actually be that particularly troublesome bastard from the prison near Baghdad? One who had taunted him back in 2009 when the administration decided to release thousands of such prisoners that they would meet again in America. There was a brief instant of eye contact, and the way the man reacted caught him now as well. Even innocent folks would do a bit of a double-take if they suddenly realized that a police officer was staring at them. But guilty of something? They would either try to brazen it out by staring back with an "I ain't done nothing wrong, so why in hell are you looking at me" look, or a quick, furtive turning away of the eyes. acting as if they had not seen him, but then catching occasional sidelong glances to see if he was still studying them. This one started the nervous sidelong glances, then turned to say something to the driver of the car, looking back over his shoulder as their car sped down the entry ramp. They were wearing black, and it looked as if there were shoulder straps for vests, the type of vests used for combat gear. Procedure as a county sheriff was to call the turnpike police, but to hell with procedure on this day. He swung his vehicle about and raced onto the turnpike in pursuit. They were already speeding up. Only months earlier, sitting up at 2 in the morning, he had watched the video released by ISIS showing them blowing cars off a major highway while music in praise of their god played. It was expert video, filmed with GoPro cameras, with laughter and taunts as background noise as they machine-gunned carloads of refugees. And now the slaughter was about to happen here. It was confirmed by puffs of smoke, followed by a car that they were passing swerving off the highway, fragments of broken glass spilling across the road. He radioed in the report, what he was going to do, and without throwing on his lights, he accelerated quickly, ramming the back of the attacker's car. He eased back on the gas for several seconds. His car was loaded with a lot more horsepower than the jihadists, and then swung to their left. The gunman leaned out the open window to shoot him, but the former MP knew his game, ducking low as a couple of shots shattered his windshield. He floored the gas pedal, advanced to near parallel with the killers, cut hard across, and rammed the side of their car. The two vehicles spun out of control. The three jihadists and the sheriff were dead a few seconds later. It was the only complete failure for ISIS in the opening minutes of Sword 2. Near Portland, Maine. The incessant ringing of her cell phone finally jarred Kathy Peterson out of her hysteria. She had been leaning on the horn of her car for several minutes, cursing the driver in front of her for blocking the entry ramp to the interstate. The overpass to the entry ramp was packed with stalled traffic. The phone call was again from her friend Mary Browning. She ignored it, looking up to realize that the driver she had been swearing at was out of his car, walking back to her. Instinctively, she reached for the pistol tucked into her jeans pocket. Was he one of them? She held the pistol up, and the man slowed, raising his hands, actually appearing to smile nervously as he stepped backward several feet, then slowly motioned for her to roll her window down. "Hey, look, lady, don't blame me. The road ahead is blocked. Can you back up so I can get out of this jam?" He again motioned for her to lower her pistol, which she did, then pointed forward, repeating his appeal. He was right. Cars were backed up across the entire approach to the interstate. A state police car, just out of sight until now, blocked the road, lights flashing. "I have to get to my daughter and husband's school," she cried. "Which one?" "Chamberlain Middle. That's where I'm heading to. Can you back up?" She got out and looked to the vehicle behind her, the driver staring at her and shouting for her to move. Kathy went to try and talk to her, but the woman refused to roll her window down, screaming at her to move it. It was gridlock, and then she heard it. Sirens approaching fast from the southbound side. They rocketed under the overpass bridge that she was standing on, one of them skidding to a stop while the other pressed on, banking his car across 2 lanes to block traffic. Someone pointed to a plume of smoke that suddenly ignited a mile or so away, screaming that it was the school on fire. She knew the school was more to the right, on the south side of the highway, not the north side, but the hysteria took hold. Whatever was burning was on the highway. Sirens again. The state trooper who had stopped down on the highway was out of his vehicle, carrying a rifle, bracing it across the hood of his car. Southbound, cars were moving fast, driven as if every driver were drunk. Flashing blue lights became visible, and a dark blue sedan appeared, swerving across 2 lanes, moving to pass a green SUV. A crackle of gunshots sounded, and the side window of the SUV shattered. The car swerving into a sideways skid, the blue sedan racing past it at over 90 miles an hour. The cop down on the highway opened fire, tracking the sedan, but his half-dozen shots apparently had no effect. There was only gunfire flashing from the sedan's rear passenger window in reply. Those around Kathy ran to the other side of the overpass, shouting that the sedan was getting away, screaming impotent curses at it while down on the interstate, the trooper who had stopped was back into his car, driving through a cut-across into the southbound side, joining in the procession of a dozen police cars still in pursuit. The shot-up SUV was on its side, crashed into the grassy berm. No one was stopping to help, if help was possible. "You still for Chamberlain Middle, lady?" She looked back at the middle-aged man dressed in typical Mainer business, a blue blazer and shirt with no tie, chinos, and boat shoes. Yes, my son is a student there, 7th grade. Let's see if we can get around this on back roads. She got back into her car and tried to back up, but there was less than a foot to spare. She backed up as far as she could until bumpers hit. It gave the man in front of her just enough room to start squeezing his small Fiat back and forth before breaking free of the gridlock, turning about to head in the opposite direction. He actually drove with 2 wheels up on the walkway as he squeezed between 2 stalled SUVs similar to hers. She sat in her car, not sure whether to wish him good luck or curse him for the way he was taking off, but he stopped, rolled down his window, and motioned for her to get in. Without a second thought, she abandoned her car, leaving the keys in the ignition so someone could move it if the road was ever cleared. She ran to the passenger side of her benefactor's car and squeezed in. "Never thought I'd like this car. Wife insisted we buy it to save on gas," he offered as she buckled herself into the narrow seat. "If it gets us through this, I'll buy one. I'm Craig Sullivan. My boy John is at Chamberlain. Kathy Peterson, my daughter Wendy, is in 7th grade. My husband Bob teaches there. We've got to get there now." "I know Bob. My son thinks the world of him." There was a moment of silence as he squeezed around a stalled dump truck. "Could you switch on my pad so we can check the reporting from the school?" She had forgotten to bring hers as she had rushed out the door and was glad to have the link. She picked up his pad from the floor, switched it on, and found the website of a local news station. To repeat the latest news, the governor of Maine has just announced that all schools in the state are in lockdown mode. He has appealed to parents to not approach any school to try and retrieve their children at this time. I am asked to repeat that. Parents are not to try and go to any school within the state. All schools are in lockdown. No one in, no one out. The governor stated that law enforcement have been scrambled to every school, public and private, throughout the state, and the children within are secured and safe. No child is to be released until it is felt that the situation is firmly under control. We have several reports now, one from Sanford, Maine, others from outside the state, of parents being mistaken for terrorists and shot. The situation, needless to say, is tense. If you are going to your child's school, please stop and go home. Your presence can do nothing to help protect your child and might actually hinder our law enforcement and emergency personnel. She lowered the volume and looked in inquiry over at Craig. "Screw that," he snapped. "Chamberlain is in the middle of this and under attack. I told my son that if the crap ever hit the fan, he was to get out of the school and to hell with what any teacher or administrator said." He looked at her, realizing as he spoke that her husband was one of said teachers and that his comment might provoke an angry retort. She nodded her head. "Agreed. We go to the school," and she turned the volume up to monitor the news while Craig pressed in the direction of the school. The rapidly escalating national panic was fueled even more when one overexcited, self-aggrandizing reporter, who had nearly created a debacle in New Orleans during Katrina when he hysterically reported a total descent into anarchy in the emergency shelter established in the Superdome, was now crying that he believed that the attacks were spreading to dozens of schools and that thousands of children were being slaughtered across the nation. His pronouncement quickly morphed into a report of fact as it leapt to the social internet sites, causing millions more to give way to their fears and ignore the logical warnings of state governors. There was a time when a public official might actually have been trusted, such as the voice of Franklin Delano Roosevelt the day after December 7th, and again Rudy Giuliani in the hours after the World Trade Center had been hit. But whom was actually trusted now? Who was trusted when every day yet a new scandal was revealed? Even before the killing started on this day, public trust in public officials was at its lowest in the history of the Republic. Easy enough for a governor to say, "Stay at home," was the first response of millions. His kids are in private school with 24/7 armed security around them. Members of Congress on up to the president, their kids were in the most expensive Quaker school in the country in an upscale neighborhood of D.C. Few commented how ironic it was that a religion devoted to complete nonviolence, even in the face of this kind of attack, was the most heavily armed and secured school campus in the country, with security posted there round the clock, even in the middle of the night. Any attacker would face a firestorm of steel, complete with helicopter support within seconds. Who are they to tell us to stay home when our children are dying and theirs are protected? And so the roads continued to fill up. To add to the irony of it all, the news feed switched to Washington, D.C., with a long-distance shot of a helicopter landing on the front lawn of that upscale school in Washington, a flurry of movement around it, heavily armed security forming a perimeter, a reporter announcing that the children of the president were thankfully safe and being airlifted to an undisclosed location. Kelly watched the brief clip, incredulous at the insensitivity of it all. Never ever would she wish harm upon that man's innocent children, but it was an aloof display of the arrogance of power, as if she was to feel relieved that at least his children were well protected, while at this very moment her daughter could be wounded or dead, her husband wounded or dead. Neither had a swarm of Secret Service agents, Marine-piloted helicopters, and, undoubtedly at this moment, attack helicopters and fighters circling over Chamberlain Middle School. She was jolted out of her resentful thoughts as Craig slammed on the brakes and turned the wheel. They were driving through a residential neighborhood, flanking the interstate, where traffic was at a complete standstill. The smoke plume they had seen in the distance was now visible, a multi-vehicle pileup on the roadway. Directly in front of them, a pickup truck had run a stop sign, not even slowing, skidded to make the turn, fishtailing, and slammed into a car headed the other way. Craig dodged the wreck, adroitly hitting the gas to regain control, and narrowly missed a man running down the middle of the street in the direction of the school. Then he sped up again. She looked back at the pad. Back to our network headquarters in New York. There was a pause for what seemed like an eternity. The network had already created a logo, America Under Attack. The logo snapped off, replaced by the familiar, comforting anchor for the network's mid-afternoon programming. It was obvious, though, that he was struggling for the composure to convey calm, particularly after the hysterical report of one of their reporters minutes earlier claimed that attacks against schools were spreading across the nation. He identified himself, then pressed straight in. We have received reports from affiliates across the nation that numerous schools are under some form of attack. However, I can state clearly that only 5 of these have been confirmed and identified as ongoing attacks, contrary to some reports from this network. It was obvious he was furious over the hysterical report of minutes earlier, claiming mass attacks across the country. The names of the schools which we have confirmed are under attack are listed at the bottom of your screen. Even if your child is in one of those schools, government officials implore you not to go there until the situation is under control. If your child's school is not on this list, please remain at home and off the highways. Kathy felt hesitation and looked over at Craig. His jawline set as he swerved around a 3-car accident at the next intersection. We're going, he confirmed, and she nodded, saying nothing. A new dimension to this day is now unfolding. Reports are starting to come in that while police attention across the nation has been focused on securing our schools, attacks have spread to our interstate highway system. So far, over 24 affiliates are reporting drive-by shootings on interstate highways. There is no discernible pattern to the locations of these attacks. Many of these attacks are taking place hundreds of miles away from any of the schools that we know are under siege. The nature of the highway attacks is identical to reports we broadcasted back in the spring when the terrorist army of ISIS moved into northern Iraq. As he spoke, a box taking up half of the screen flashed on, time-stamped from early June and filmed from the interior of a car, of barrels of AK-47s stuck out of side windows and Middle Eastern music playing. The murderers were shouting and laughing as they drove up alongside an orange car, and then a hail of gunfire poured into it. The car swerved off the road, accompanied by laughter and shouts of glee and cries of Allahu Akbar, as the orange car, riddled with bullet holes, crashed. We have footage of such attacks from our affiliate in Austin, Texas, and from Knoxville, Tennessee, taken by news helicopters. The box showing the first attack was replaced by 2 smaller ones, video shot from helicopters showing a massive conflagration on Interstate 40 filmed just east of Knoxville, Tennessee, engulfing both sides of the highway, dozens of cars piled up. The second small screen footage was of a vehicle pursued by 4 or 5 police cars passing a white sedan, gunfire striking the sedan, which then swerved and slammed into the pillar of an overpass. The screen returned to full size. Even as I am speaking to you, my producer is telling me that more footage is coming in from Daytona, Florida, and Dover, Delaware, of similar attacks. He paused, and it was obvious he was not acting for dramatic effect. His voice was trembling, near to breaking. In light of what we are now seeing, I must personally say that America is facing a coordinated attack by a foreign enemy. There is no hard evidence yet, but I will lay my career on the line with this, that we are facing the long-anticipated and publicly announced attack that ISIS has been threatening us with for months. It is either ISIS or a radical group associated with them. This horrific attack bears the markings of mass murderers without regard for any concept of civilized behavior. I therefore appeal to all of you to do two things. First, pray to God that this scourge shall speedily pass away. That shocked Kathy. His words were both Lincoln-esque, but also unheard of in this current age. A reporter asking his listeners to appeal to God? An ironic thought that even now, within minutes, the network would probably be flooded with text messages and phone calls demanding that the reporter be fired for jamming his religious views down the throats of his audience and that he make an on-air apology for it. And second, I appeal to you that if you are on the road trying to reach your children in schools, please pull over, stop, and take a deep breath. He paused, obviously welling up. I cannot leave here to try to reach my kids, though every fiber of my being as a father is screaming at me to do so. He paused, lowering his head for a moment. In television, even a few seconds of silence felt like an eternity, and it was a good 10 seconds before he regained his composure to face the camera again. "We need to take a break," was all he could now muster. Kathy looked at Craig, for a moment filled with doubt about what they were doing. "We aren't going any further," he announced. She wondered if he was indeed abandoning their quest and was ready to turn about. If so, she would tell him to stop, get out, and run the rest of the way. Their school, her daughter's school, her husband's school, was confirmed as being under attack. It was not a rumor, it was not a fear, it was confirmed, and she had to be there. Craig skidded to a stop, and she looked up again. It was not that he was giving up. They were still a quarter-mile out from Chamberlain Middle, but the road ahead was jammed, bumper to bumper, red taillights glowing, frantic parents getting out of their cars, abandoning them in the traffic jam, deciding to run toward the chaos. Ambulances and police cars were driving across lawns and walkways, sirens wailing. It was a cacophony of madness. She got out of the car, a bit startled when Craig actually grabbed her shoulder. "Come on!"
All right, there has not been a chapter break for a minute here. I want to catch up on the comments. Anonymous said he listened to the whole book Friday, and he has to admit he teared up more than once. I agree, man. Fiend Dog is dropping some stuff about his drones and stuff. I'm still not seeing a whole lot on the. You never sent me anything, my dude. That would have been nice. Bake Off, Run, Hide, Fight. Yes, Lawfully's been rocking the chat by himself tonight. Is anybody else here? Old Man Butt Wrinkle
If you
said,
can't do anything,
What?
I said if you can't do anything about it, kinetic, at least get out.
Right. Yeah. If you can't, if you're sitting there in your skivvies, there's no point in you even being there. Get out. Hopefully you can take a normie with you or a kid or something. Save that life. But yeah, if you don't have your EDC or anything, you're. I mean, even if you had a pocket knife in that situation, it's useless, pretty much. So. But yeah, we're gonna keep on going. Lawfully, you got anything?
No, let it roll.
Let's do it.
He cried, and she started to run with him. She felt as if her heart were about to burst, for in the distance she could hear the repetitive bursts of gunfire. Her husband, her daughter were in the deepest circle of hell. Inside Joshua Chamberlain Middle School, the gunfire ceased in the room across the hall. Bob could hear muffled, child-voiced moans and cries. Heartbreaking, so many calls for Mommy as they died. Mommy, who, when they were at the arrogant age of 12 and 13, was a source of embarrassment and eye-rolling when an attempt was made to kiss and hug them in public. But in a moment of terror, of pain, of dying, it was a cry to a mother for comfort, to hold them and to ease the pain as they died, and it steeled Bob for what he had to do. He was so shocked by the anguish of it all that he first had to wipe tears from his eyes, silently cursing himself for his moment of frozen inaction and fear. How could any man, any human being, inflict such suffering upon children? He could hear the triumphal calls to their Allah echoing down the hallway, and it filled him with rage, and now the motivation to move aggressively and fight back. All the years of political correctness, all the appeals from the nation's leaders to extend a hand of friendship to all, if really true, where was the righteous anger now? In the same way Christians by the tens of thousands rose up in anger against the evils of the Westboro Church that harassed the families of dead soldiers returning home in caskets from the Middle East and taunted gays and anyone who was different, he had enough of an interest in history to recall, even in these few seconds, Winston Churchill's sarcastic response and warnings against the appeasement of his nation's leader in 1938, and the terrible price it would eventually cost Great Britain and the free world. And that price had now come due again, literally in the corridors of his school, his daughter's school, and he was at the very tip of the spear of that price. And now he prayed that in the next few seconds he could do something, anything to slow them down, to buy time, and if need be, to die well doing what was right. He checked on Patty, who was guiding her charges up and out of the shattered window, encouraging each to run the moment they hit the ground. To his horror, he saw two of them drop, caught in the gunfire raging outside the building, but the others were making it through. It did not take a trained expert to know that a moving target was infinitely harder to hit than one cowering in a corner or lying prone on the floor. If some of them were getting through, it was better than waiting here for certain death. Patty's gaze caught his eye as she helped the last child up to the window before climbing out herself. She was crying, staring straight at him. "God be with you, Bob," she mouthed the words, nearly silent, then turned to drop out the window behind the last of her children. There were 6 more classrooms down the long hall beyond the one he was holed up in, plus the room across the hallway where the murderer was finishing off the last of his victims. He prayed that the teachers in those rooms had followed Patty's lead, but knew they had not. One was Margaret Redding's classroom. Last he had seen her, she was cowering in the faculty lounge, her teaching assistant left in charge of the classroom. That poor, harried, elderly woman was afraid of her own shadow and would follow every order by Margaret, which would include ordering the children to lie down as sheep and await slaughter. He saw no other children sprinting across the playground. There was no view to the other side of the building, but he had to assume that far too many classrooms still had victims waiting for their executioner, who would call out to his alleged God as he put a 9mm bullet into the head of each child before moving on to the next room. He could hear the sirens outside, the thumping of at least one helicopter which he hoped would bring succor. He did not know that it was a news helicopter filming and transmitting the insanity rather than a SWAT team, which, in reality, was still forming up in downtown Portland and not yet in the air. The shooting and screams in the room across the hallway stopped. The fire alarm was still wailing its incessant, numbing shriek, sprinklers continuing to douse the corridor. He was down flat on the floor at the doorway, pistol raised, aimed at the open doorway across the hall. He kept going over in his head the training he had received for the concealed permit. Breathe in, half exhale, aim and squeeze. Breathe in, half exhale, but it did not still the hyperventilation of fear and nervousness. 3 bullets. I've got 3 bullets. He has hundreds. Breathe, half exhale. Hail Mary, full of grace. He started to pray, though it had been years since he last attended Mass on the day he and Kathy married. A tall, dark shadow appeared in the doorway across the hall. Now. He squeezed off 2 rounds, aimed straight at the chest, the center of the body. The shadow staggered backwards for a moment, but then just came forward toward the doorway where Bob was waiting. A flash moment of terror. What in hell was this? The Terminator? Indestructible? The murderer's weapon lowered, aimed straight at him. He saw the muzzle flash. A terrible shock struck him in the back. His lower body went numb. Armor. He has body armor. Bob was in that instant inwardly amazed that he could recognize such a thing as he looked up, saw his opponent drawing closer, weapon at the shoulder, aiming down to deliver a killing shot to his head before moving on to murder more children. Bob pointed his pistol straight up and squeezed off the last round, his bullet striking his foe just below the left eye, killing him instantly, so that the jihadist staggered backwards and collapsed into the room where he had been so gleefully slaughtering the defenseless but seconds earlier. Bob lay in shock for long seconds, empty pistol aimed at the recumbent body across the school corridor, the legs of his enemy twitching spasmodically for several seconds before going still. He kept the pistol aimed at him, not yet registering that the slide of his pistol was fully back, indicating his weapon was empty. When he did realize it, there was a brief thought to look about on the floor for the single unfired cartridge he had ejected earlier. The floor around him was slick with blood. It was not registering yet that it was his own blood, commingled with the blood of his enemy from his first shot to the jaw. There was silence in the building except for the wailing cry of the fire alarm. Was there any way to turn that damn thing off? He wondered. Sprinklers in the hallway were still spraying out a mist of water, diluting the rivulets of blood seeping out of the scores of children, the principal and the 2 teachers lying dead in the corridor. More firing, thundering loud from down by the administrative area. He dared to peek out from the cover of the doorway. No jihadist was in sight, but there was someone firing from that area, while from outside the building he heard sirens and what sounded like more gunfire. A shadow, a dark face covered with a ski mask, appeared at the end of the hallway, shouting something that he assumed was Arabic. A query, an order, another call. A sparkle-like effect appeared on the wall above him. Bullets fired from outside were impacting above the killer. The face disappeared, and a couple of seconds later there was a sustained burst of automatic fire in reply. Bob continued to look down the corridor. Was that the pathetic-looking body of Mr. Carl in the middle of the hallway, blank eyes staring at him with warning, reproach, or orders to keep going, to keep fighting back? He had seen 3 killers storming his building, 3 against 530 children and 37 adults. He had without doubt dropped one of the killers, but that meant that 2 remained. Chechnya. This was not some random act of madness. This was a well-planned attack by jihadists. Their mission was to kill as many defenseless innocents as possible before they themselves were taken to paradise. They were remorseless murderers. There would be no negotiating. For negotiating simply bought time to inflict more killing. He recalled a discussion on a news channel, a commentator who was bitterly denounced by various Friendship with Islam organizations afterwards, quoting their Quran, that ultimately negotiations with infidels were simply a ploy until true believers gained control and then the infidels were to submit or die. All bargaining was a sham, for each bargain would be a step backwards. The only way he could bargain now was to somehow get a weapon and continue to fight back. 2 killers still at large in his school, and he had an empty gun. A complete sense of impotence overwhelmed him for a moment. At least his daughter's class had gotten out. Wendy? He did not even know if she had made it through the kill zone or not, and the thought of that filled him with rage. Bastards! Damn cowardly bastards! Target us, the adults in the trade center and the Pentagon, but this was a step beneath the gutter of all humanity. They had brought their hell to Chamberlain Middle School near Portland, Maine. Chamberlain. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. How few knew that their school was actually named after a hero of the Civil War, a holder of the Medal of Honor for his gallantry and leadership at Gettysburg. There was supposed to be a ritual each year to honor his memory, but few paid attention when it was held, and many grumbled that it took time out from the pressing need to prepare the students for the next battery of mandatory testing. Taking time to honor some dead guy of 150 years ago, there were other things far more important. He had a memory of reading about Chamberlain, how when his regiment was out of ammunition, facing 5 times their number charging up the hill that they were ordered to hold at all costs, he had come to what was the only logical conclusion. He had ordered his men to fix bayonets and charge. The terrifying reality that the shot put into his back had paralyzed him was beginning to sink in. Charging was out. but less than 20 feet away there was at least one gun and plenty of ammunition. He could still block this corridor against the other murderers for a few more precious minutes until help arrived. He started to drag his body across the water and blood-soaked hallway, and then the pain hit. Agonizing, terrifying. He could see Mr. Carl, his sightless eyes staring at him. In spite of the shrieking of the fire alarm, the spray of water cascading down, he could hear the gunfire, the sound of hot shell casings ejecting onto the checkerboard flooring by the foyer, and more distant firing coming from the other wing of the school. With his gaze fixed down the corridor, he continued to crawl, foot by agonizing foot, toward the man he had just killed, who still held in his blood-stained hands the means to salvation. For at least a few more minutes. A distant, shadowed face appeared again at the end of the corridor, staring straight at him. To Bob, his eyes looked to be the eyes of Satan incarnate on earth, remorseless and cold as a serpent's. The killer aimed his weapon. Chapter 5. As they had so adroitly planned, so clearly understanding their enemy far better than the enemy understood themselves.
We're just going to plug this one out, guys. I'm going to try and knock it out tonight.
The highways were now flooding with traffic. There were over 70 million children attending nearly 100,000 public schools in America. Millions more were in private, church, and parochial schools. The targets had been carefully chosen to hit outside of major cities and in geographical locations so that no part of the country felt safe.
Hitting outside
All
the
of the
major
targets
cities
were very
what
close to
everybody's
interstate
reporting on right
highways,
now.
the route that so many parents would flock to within minutes to speed to the schools their children were in, whether that school was under attack or not. The fear of school shootings had been a running nightmare in the heart of every parent since Columbine. Endless rounds of arguments and debates swirled around the scenario. It was those lone, sick killers in American schools across the previous 2 decades that had inspired the Caliph with his plan. Nearly all had been psychotic American males from teens to early 20s. All were loners. Nearly all had fantasized online and obsessively spent hundreds of hours with the endless outpouring of America's entertainment media of shooter games and mass murder movies. Nearly all had played out a sick, perverted fantasy in their final moments as they had become killers, usually vengeance for some slight from a girl, from a bully, or from the system. The killings were a power trip during their final moments that all would cower as they stalked the halls. And nearly all had ultimately proven themselves cowards in the Caliph's eyes, either fleeing when the police arrived or killing themselves like Hitler in his bunker. And so the pattern of response in American schools had evolved. A plethora of "this campus is a gun-free zone," drills and more drills, usually just with teachers, of course. No one wanted to frighten the children, even though they saw the news every night and chatted about it on Facebook. Lock the door, lie down, wait for rescue. A few will die, maybe even a few dozen, but the vast majority will be saved by lying down and waiting for others to come to the rescue. The brilliance of the Caliph's plan was understanding the pattern of the infidels' reaction, how they would respond collectively to a threat to their precious children. They usually had just 1 or 2 offspring, not 6 or 8, with a willingness to see their progeny sacrificed to Allah's will. No, for them each child was precious, doted upon and coddled. The parents across the entire nation would react, the nation falling into mass panic. Unlike the fool bin Laden's attack on 9/11, every American would feel personally threatened, not just those living in New York and Washington. Every American in those first moments would fear that their precious child was about to become a target as well. Though only a few out of nearly 100,000 schools were now threatened, millions of parents would rush out of their homes and their offices and flood onto the interstates. The frenzy would build. The planners had calculated it well and had laughed over it. Thus it now unfolded, and the time to launch Sword 2 had come. There was no need to send the final message. All who were trained knew the exact moment, but in his arrogant delight he ordered the message to be sent anyhow. Sword 2. After sending the message, the transmitting phone was left active in the corner of a captured Christian church near Raqqa. the messenger laughing as he drove off. Sword 2 had already begun in some places such as Austin, Syracuse, and near Portland, Maine, ahead of schedule. Attack teams began to pull out of hotel parking lots, which, in less than a minute, put them on the American interstates, highways built as copies of the German Autobahns, ironically ordered as a defense measure in the event of a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union. Sword 2 was made up of teams of 2 to 3 jihadist martyrs. There was a driver, armed with a 9mm pistol for a final defense, and 1 or 2 gunmen armed with AK-47s, each with 30 or more clips of jacketed rounds. Simply get on the highway, swing alongside cars, preferably those with a number of passengers, and shoot the driver. Tractor-trailers were sweet targets. Drive up, send several shots through the door, then speed on, hoping the truck jackknifes. Even better if it is carrying petrol or some hazardous material. The team that roared onto Interstate 40 near Knoxville headed east for the connection to Interstate 81 and hit their jackpot in the first 2 minutes. A tractor-trailer hauling petrol swerved out of control, the holy warrior laughing that he had hit the driver in the head with his first shot. All of the mayhem that ensued was created by a single 7.62 round fired from a Kalashnikov. That opening move proved how simple the plan was, how effective it was, and it created joyful anticipation of all that they could accomplish in the next few hours. The truck crashed through the flimsy highway barrier into the westbound lanes, rolling over, gasoline spilling out, bursting into flames, and seconds later exploding. 2 more trucks were taken out by the Knoxville attack team in less than a minute, one on each side of the highway, sealing the road off in both directions. 200 miles further east, on I-40, a Sword 2 unit was now working in cooperation with the Sword 1 unit that had stormed an elementary school several miles to the west of Hickory. From the highway, they could see that the school was burning and traffic was backed up on the exit ramp. The American parents were in complete panic. Apparently, an accident occurred at the top of the ramp blocking the exit. Vehicles were swinging onto the grassy berm to get around the bottleneck, but since it had rained heavily the night before, many were bogging down, wheels spinning. The team of 3 actually broke their train procedure for the moment, so rich was their target now. Coming to a stop, one of the killers shot the driver of the car behind them and triggered a chain reaction accident involving several dozen cars. The jihadists then exited their vehicle and stood along the side of the road, calling on their God, laughing as they turned the traffic jam at the exit ramp into target practice, one ordering the other to take aimed single shots and not waste ammunition on such easy targets. Several dozen frantic parents were slaughtered in little more than a minute. It was almost too easy, they thought, as they got back into their car and pressed on westward. Nearly all of the other teams stuck to their training in those first minutes. On Interstate 287, the outer ring of New York City, 30 cars were taken off the road in the first 5 minutes. At a jammed exit ramp near the school under attack in Bakersfield, California, nearly as many parents were now dead as students in the school. In reality, the casualty rate in the schools was just now beginning to soar as captive children were herded into the gym to drag out the agony of what the response team thought would be negotiations. All negotiations were a sham, of course. A knife could kill quietly, even gruesomely, while those surrounding the building outside heard nothing from the locker rooms where the slaughter was taking place and thought they were talking their opponents into laying down their weapons. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Wheeling, West Virginia, Birmingham, Alabama, Little Rock, Arkansas, Crete, Nebraska, Salt Lake City, Utah, Phoenix, Arizona, and along remote stretches of highways such as south of Valdosta, Georgia, and northward along I-77 into West Virginia, the 30-plus teams of Sword 2 were unleashing death. The roads were
Muffin
packed with
top.
parents bent on reaching their children, most not even seeing death racing up behind them or about
Is
to
this
pass in the
repeating?
opposite direction. Only one team of Sword 2 had been completely stopped in those first minutes due to a random encounter with a county sheriff in an unmarked car near
Is this repeating
Kingston,
right
New
now?
York.
What the hell?
It was when earlier. Bob laid in shock for long seconds.
Have we heard this part yet?
Maybe not.
Was that weird? It was repeating, right?
I'd swear it.
That's what I thought. All right, well, let's go from here. This is when let's back up. He gets.
Cars were backed up across the entire approach to the
All right,
interstate.
let's try.
A state police car, just out of sight until now, blocked the road, lights flashing. "I have to get to my daughter and husband's school," she cried. "Which one?" Undoubtedly, at this moment, attack helicopters and fighters circling over Chamberlain Middle School. She was jolted out of her resentful thoughts as Craig slammed on the brakes and turned the wheel. They were driving through a residential neighborhood, flanking the interstate, where traffic was at a complete standstill. The smoke plume they had seen in the distance was now visible, a multi-vehicle pileup on the roadway. Directly in front of them, a pickup truck had run a stop sign, not even slowing, skidded to make the turn, fishtailing, and slammed into a car headed the other way. Craig dodged the wreck, adroitly hitting the gas to regain control, and narrowly missed a man running down the middle of the street in the direction of the school. Then he sped up again. She looked back at the pad. Back to our network headquarters in New York. There was a pause for what seemed like an eternity. The network had already created a logo, America Under Attack. The logo snapped off, replaced by the familiar, comforting anchor for the network's mid-afternoon programming. It was obvious, though, that he was struggling for the composure to convey calm, particularly after the hysterical report of one of their reporters minutes earlier claimed that attacks against schools were spreading across the nation. He identified himself, then pressed straight in. "We have received reports from affiliates across the nation that numerous schools are under some form of attack. However, I can state clearly that only 5 of these have been confirmed and identified as ongoing attacks, contrary to some reports from this network." It was obvious he was furious over the hysterical report of minutes earlier, claiming mass attacks across the country. "The names of the schools which we have confirmed are under attack are listed at the bottom of your screen. Even if your child is in one of those schools, government officials implore you not to go there until the situation is under control. If your child's school is not on this list, please remain at home and off the highways." Kathy felt hesitation and looked over at Craig, his jawline set as he swerved around a 3-car accident at the next intersection. "We're going," he confirmed, and she nodded, saying nothing. A new dimension to this day is now unfolding. Reports are starting to come in that while police attention across the nation has been focused on securing our schools, attacks have spread to our interstate highway system. So far, over 24 affiliates are reporting drive-by shootings on interstate highways. There is no discernible pattern to the locations of these attacks. Many of these attacks are taking place hundreds of miles away from any of the schools that we know are under siege. The nature of the highway attacks is identical to reports we broadcasted back in the spring when the terrorist army of ISIS moved into northern Iraq. As he spoke, a box taking up half of the screen flashed on, time-stamped from early June and filmed from the interior of a car, of barrels of AK-47s stuck out of side windows and Middle Eastern music playing. The murderers were shouting and laughing as they drove up alongside an orange car, and then a hail of gunfire poured into it. The car swerved off the road, accompanied by laughter and shouts of glee and cries of Allahu Akbar, as the orange car, riddled with bullet holes, crashed. We have footage of such attacks from our affiliate in Austin, Texas, and from Knoxville, Tennessee, taken by news helicopters. The box showing the first attack was replaced by 2 smaller ones, video shot from helicopters showing a massive conflagration on Interstate 40 filmed just east of Knoxville, Tennessee, engulfing both sides of the highway, dozens of cars piled up. The second small screen footage was of a vehicle pursued by 4 or 5 police cars, passing a white sedan, gunfire striking the sedan, which then swerved and slammed into the pillar of an overpass. The screen returned to full size. Even as I am speaking to you, my producer is telling me that more footage is coming in from Daytona, Florida, and Dover, Delaware, of similar attacks. He paused, and it was obvious he was not acting for dramatic effect. His voice was trembling, near to breaking. "In light of what we are now seeing, I must personally say that America is facing a coordinated attack by a foreign enemy. There is no hard evidence yet, but I will lay my career on the line with this, that we are facing the long-anticipated and publicly announced attack that ISIS has been threatening us with for months. It is either ISIS or a radical group associated with them. This horrific attack bears the markings of mass murderers without regard for any concept of civilized behavior. I therefore appeal to all of you to do 2 things. First, pray to God that this scourge shall speedily pass away. That shocked Kathy. His words were both Lincoln-esque, but also unheard of in this current age. A reporter asking his listeners to appeal to God? An ironic thought that even now, within minutes, the network would probably be flooded with text messages and phone calls demanding that the reporter be fired for jamming his religious views down the throats of his audience and that he make an on-air apology for it. And second, I appeal to you that if you are on the road trying to reach your children in schools, please pull over, stop, and take a deep breath. He paused, obviously welling up.
Yeah, this thing's like repeating or something, guys.
I
don't know.
cannot leave here to try to reach my kids, though every on the highways and from the schools under attack. The technologies of the infidels were being turned against them. A broadcast from Austin,
What do they
Texas,
call it, or
coming
let it
from
keep
one of their
going?
major networks, showed
I
his
think he
team
just
there
skipped ahead a
shifting
little bit.
vehicles after their first one was disabled by
I think
police
I remember
fire.
this.
His fighter
Listen to
actually
it.
made a point of arrogantly and cheerfully waving to the camera before executing the American whore who had owned the high-priced German car. The mere fact that the blonde was allowed by her husband to drive a vehicle
Oh
on
yeah,
her
this is
own
good.
was a clear enough sign to all of the moral decks, both the bus and the cowboy on video. Up ahead, the pad's
Let's
news
try it.
feed
I
was
don't know. This
showing
is
that the
failing. I
police
don't
they
know
had
what's going
blocked
on
off
with it.
earlier when they struck the truck that exploded into flames had been alerted to their approach and were running across the highway. The fools in the helicopter news camera keeping pace with them to capture the potential roadblock and film their demise. They were essentially trapped on this stretch of road. The camera shifted from the highway back toward Austin. A Black Hawk was approaching. It looked military. Would they use it? With their American obsession of avoiding injuring their own and even avoiding injuring civilians on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, would they actually use it? The noose might be tightening, but the mayhem, the glorious attack, would continue on to the bitter end. He switched the camera on the pad so that his face could be seen. Allahu Akbar, the infidels are dying like sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Chapter 7. Near Raqqa, Syria. There was a wild exaltation in the room, a well-concealed bunker created beneath a mosque on the edge of that war-tortured city. It had been activated that morning as the nerve center for this day. A pad, Bluetoothed to a flat screen mounted on a concrete wall, was the active receiver of the Moment for Twitter account, #DSIRE631. The messages were scrolling across the screen so fast that at times they could hardly be read. #DSIRE654, Allahu Akbar, many infidels now in hell, school burning. #DSIRE673, our killing police on their national news, Allahu Akbar. #DSIRE654, #DSIRE644, #DSIRE627. All were proclaiming victories, boasting, joyous with how easy the killing was, as he, their leader, had promised it would be. Before the last of the jihadists died, the Americans would be tearing themselves apart yet again, screaming at each other to change the document that some worshipped as if it were a god, regarding their right to buy and carry guns, while others would scream about the source of some of the weapons, which dated back years to a surreal plan by their own government. It would be one of many additional benefits of their attack that he had spoken of to his inner circle. Several other screens in the room showed live feeds coming straight from the jihadists traveling the highways and from the schools under attack. The technologies of the infidels were being turned against them. A broadcast from Austin, Texas, coming from one of their major networks, showed his team there shifting vehicles after their first one was disabled by police fire. His fighter actually made a point of arrogantly and cheerfully waving to the camera before executing the American whore who had owned the high-priced German car. The mere fact that the blonde was allowed by her husband to drive a vehicle on her own was a clear enough sign to all of the moral decadence of the enemy, and for that sin alone she deserved the punishment received. He hoped her husband saw the just result of his spineless folly. A feed sent by his team assigned to Interstate 75 working south from Valdosta, Georgia, were enjoying an absolutely open killing ground on the broad highway, traveling at over 160 kilometers per hour on the flat, open interstate, having already left behind them 100 kilometers of wreckage. The signal had gone dead from the teams assigned to Interstate 40 in North Carolina and the Knoxville, Tennessee area. The final video sent from the Knoxville unit was of their approaching an overpass where at least half a dozen armed men and women were waiting, firing down on their vehicle. In contrast, on the Interstate 91 going north along the Vermont-New Hampshire border, the Holy Warriors were having a joyful killing spree. The team assigned to the tangle of interstates southwest of Boston at the 495 and 95 interchange were now caught in a massive traffic jam, had finally abandoned their car, and were simply walking among the vehicles, executing trapped drivers who, sheep-like, were too terrified to get out and run. They were reporting that once they saw an opening, they'd grab another car and continue their run toward Rhode Island. All of this information was flooding in, along with the news media feeds from the United States. Their major networks were now reporting that cell phone networks were overloading and going down, and the most popular internet social media site servers were overloading as well. The fact that millions could not cling to their crutches of cell phones and social media was increasing the level of panic. He laughed at that one. Every American was so self-centered that he viewed his own slightest crisis as an emergency, ready to call 911 if he spilled a cup of hot coffee on himself. In their panic, they would not listen, jam the highways, and the chaos would continue to spread. When ISIS released their one-hour video back in June of their triumphal advance into Iraq, the reaction in the West had been fascinating and revealing. All of the American news media sources, both general broadcast and print, had picked up on it within an hour. But then they censored it. They culled out excerpts, the execution of several dozen traitorous collaborators lined up in a ditch, the individual executions with a pistol to the back of each man's head, a 10-year-old hero shooting several traitors. All of it was censored. Their media would show the moment leading up to the kill, but then stop there. Far too upsetting for the infidels with weak stomachs to see. They might become ill and switch to their favorite reality show rather than see their fate if they did not submit to the will of Allah. The media prefaced the brief clips that they did show with words such as an alleged execution near Mosul, a purported execution, a supposed execution. It was as if the film that his organization had created had its own Hollywood special effects team at work to fake the actual killings. How the Americans loved their fake violence in their perverted movies of sex and killing, but could not stomach it for real. They could not hide what was happening now. Their technology had leapt forward in the years since September 11th. Every one of their citizens was armed with a cell phone camera and instant access to the entire world. In less than 2 hours, tens of millions of videos showing the carnage were flooding into the global media to be forwarded by hundreds of millions more. Allah be praised, they were now wallowing in their terror for the whole world to see. This glorious chaos created by little more than 100 of his holy fighters. He had a dozen highly trained technicians at work in the command bunker. One had been educated at Oxford, another had attended classes at MIT. It was a team of expert video editors who, the moment the sword operations began and the first uplinks flooded in, were sorting through the traffic, capturing the best images and creating near-instant, well-crafted media for the global internet. Their productions were designed to instill terror in their enemies and joy for true believers. Even now, the first videos were being fine-tuned and soundtracks added, their songs singing of the glory of the Prophet, about to be uploaded to news sources across the Middle East and the internet in general. "We have a good one here," one of his technicians announced and pointed at the screen. It was a live feed from a news helicopter circling the school near Portland, Maine, where a highly successful attack was taking place. Though there had been a report that one of the fighters had been killed, what one of them was now doing was being broadcasted by the local affiliate and picked up by the national feed. This was the moment that would notch it up even further. Near Portland, Maine. Standing on the roof of Joshua Chamberlain Middle School, one of his courageous fighters was looking up at a circling news helicopter. It was the local Fox station, its logo clearly stenciled on the side, circling tight, camera aimed straight down. His fighter was holding what looked to be a girl of about 12 years or so, who continued to struggle as he held her tight against his side. And then he did exactly what was done at the school in Chechnya, starting by yanking her skirt off. New York City. Kill the feed. Kill that feed. The New York anchor was out of his chair, screaming to his program director. The huge, oversized screen behind him went dead, but the monitor facing him, not visible to the national audience, was still showing what was being done to the young girl, and he stood silent, shaking. The studio went silent. They were not broadcasting the image of the rape, but monitors inside the studio were still receiving the images being sent down from Portland, Maine. Discipline, the long years of discipline which had held up even during the darkest moments of 9/11, broke inside the studio at the sight of the torturing abuse of the child. Screams of shock, rage, and anguish filled the room. The anchor just stared at the screen, his features going pale, his fists clenched in impotent fury. America was not directly seeing the rape, except in the Portland area where the program director had gone into a state of catatonic shock and had not switched the signal off. But the rest of the world was seeing it nevertheless in the reaction of the anchorman who stood transfixed, tears streaming down his face. There was the flash of the knife, held up high so the circling helicopter could see it, even as the chopper started to dive down toward the roof of the school. The pilot was unable to bear what he was witnessing and decided to land, to try and intervene with his bare hands. The knife slid so easily across the child's throat, ending her agony. The anchor, finally aware that he had been standing silent in front of a national audience for a minute or more, looked back at the camera. "Are we on?" he muttered. "Are we on live?" "You are, but the video feed is not," the cameraman announced, his voice shuddering. "The child is dead, thank God," he whispered. "Dear God, we implore you, please still her pain and grant her peace." He could not speak for a moment, tried to, then, knowing he could not control his emotions, he lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. He finally raised his gaze to the camera with a cold, icy stare. "Are we on?" he asked again. A voice off camera responded that they were going out live, but only from the studio. "If there are police seeing this, listen to me. In the name of God, end it now. Storm the schools. They are not taking prisoners. They are now raping and torturing the children trapped within. Storm the schools, save our children, and then—" He paused. "And then kill every one of the animals doing this. Kill them all." He turned his back to the camera, his shoulders shaking as he cried uncontrollably. He knew his appeal to the police had, without doubt, ended his career, but he no longer cared. The image of what he had just seen done to a child. If he did not cry out in protest, then what kind of man was he? Inside Joshua Chamberlain Middle School, the killer just missed him, bullets peppering the wall mere inches over his head. Bob pretended that he had been hit, went limp, and laid still for long minutes, not daring to move. Shooting continued from down the hallway, but not in his direction. How long had it been? Bob was feeling increasingly lightheaded, his mind blanking out, and forced himself to focus. He finally dared to crawl the last few feet to the man he had killed, grabbed the M4 from his grasp, and pulled out the 9mm strapped to his shoulder harness. He tried not to take in the horror of the classroom. They were all dead. There was nothing he could do here. He could hear long bursts of volleys from the administrative wing and further on from the area of the gym and dining hall. He decided to try and crawl down the hallway, perhaps ambush one of them from behind. He dragged himself out the doorway, made it half a dozen feet, and then the black-covered head appeared again. The terrorists saw him and fired a burst, a round striking his shoulder and the floor. Bits of torn linoleum sliced his face. He feigned that he was dead yet again, and the gunman turned back to keeping the police outside at bay. Bob rolled in tight against the wall, kept the M4 poised, and aimed down the corridor. He no longer had the strength to move. Waves of pain from his back and shoulders slammed him every second or so. He sensed that if he tried to get closer, they would finish him off for certain. But he could still do something. If the teachers in the classrooms behind him had not yet pushed their children out the windows and fled, if one of the attackers came this way, he would wait until the last second, mimic death, then kill him. As he waited, the agony continued. He knew that his back was broken. The numbing shock of being hit not just once, but twice was rapidly wearing off, and the pain was building with each passing minute. The damn fire alarm was still screeching, and the hallway fire sprinkler still soaking him. So much water was puddling that streams of pinkish slush washed around him. His brain started to register the heavy scent of spent gunpowder overlaying the metallic smell of blood. One child, about 20 feet away, was curled up, shot in the stomach, and sobbed softly, calling for her mother. He managed to get her attention, motioned for her to lie low and to be still. He recognized her. She was one of his daughter's friends. "Help is coming, Jessica. Just be quiet so they don't shoot you again." She nodded, and biting her lip, she remained down. Something outside sounded different and was getting louder. Was it a helicopter? It was thundering as if it was
All right,
directly
guys, I think
overhead
we're
on the
gonna
roof
end it
above.
there tonight.
My God.
We had a little bit of an issue with the thing rereading itself, which was weird, but this book really makes me angry, and I can only listen to so much of it at once. Please stack. Get your body prepared. Help your loved ones. I don't think now's the time for prep or burnout, especially with everything going on. Stack your stuff as much as you can, guys. Food is going to be a huge thing. This book's really been ringing home for me with all of the things that are happening in the world right now. Almost like it's just setting this bad boy off for the powder keg to pop off. I think this is 80% likely. 80% likely. So
All the migrants that have poured over our border the last few years.
I think this last year especially was very focused and targeted migration, unfortunately. Everything that's happening in other world governments, I don't know.
China.
Just be ready. Yeah. It's all orchestrated, and we're not going to come out on top, I don't think, unfortunately. So, want y'all take it easy. Thanks for hopping in. Sorry the book messed up in there a little bit, but appreciate everybody who came in. Hopefully this gives you some stuff to think about. Be on the
Like, share,
lookout
and
for more
sell.
videos. Yep, be on the lookout. I'm editing the hashtag yellow lid deal, and I want to go into like a good, better, best, and then like high end that you could do as far as like water storage, and then like blasters, food storage, things like this. I got a couple ways to transport it. I got an idea to do like if you had just a spot to put like a 2-wheel cart, you could have, this basically buddy load out, whatever stash load out there. You could have hygiene / like camping stuff, and then like food, medical, and then like water procurement all on a 2-wheel cart. So if you could find a spot to put a 2-wheel cart and 4 totes on it with like a ratchet strap, like somebody's closet or something, I mean, that's going to effectively be basically a month bug out location worth of stuff. So be on the lookout for that. Oops, somebody's in the back. Van Drake just hopped in the back. What's up, my dude? Did you listen to this audiobook at all? He ordered MSB ordered it tonight. It's a good book, man, but it will piss you off, man.
Yeah, that's what he said in the Muffin Top Discord.
Yeah, but he listened to it on YouTube and then he bought the audiobook. Honestly, if you let somebody like a normie listen to that too. What's up, Van Drake?
What? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
Bad timing though. I'm about to bail. I don't know if Honda's doing a chat tonight or not, but I appreciate everybody.
Yeah, he's doing one at the top of the hour.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Make sure you guys go check it out, eHonda.
Yeah, I just finally got to sit down at work.
Sorry, my dude. It's all good. I just figured I'd shoot you one. We wanted to see what you thought about it. Hopefully you listen to this book. What's your 2 cents?
Day of Wrath. All right, I'll probably try to check it out.
Yeah, it's a free book in my Discord. You can listen to the whole thing.
Okay.
It's really good. It'll piss you off, especially with you got kids and stuff. So,
Right.
deuces, my guy. See you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.